In my head, you have held me in your arms. In my head, I've been witness to your charms 1,000 times. You have sung me a love song in my head.
Hello, and you're very welcome to the latest episode of the Attic Sessions. And today we've actually gone on the road again, delighted to be in the beautiful surroundings of the River Mill, which is a writers' and readers' retreat in the heart of County Down in Northern Ireland. And we are doubly delighted to be joined by the star of the County Down, the poet and playwright Damian Smyth. Damian, you're very welcome. Thanks. We've been trying to organise to get you on our attic for a long time, so it's great that we've been able to come to your neck of the woods to meet you here. And you were born in Downpatrick, was it? So that's like just a few miles down the road.
I was born in Downpatrick and reared in Downpatrick, and practically everything I've thought about and certainly written about has been about the environs of Downpatrick.
So did you know this place? Did you know the River Mill, or were you aware of?
No, I didn't know the River Mill,
or
its previous incarnation as a ruin. I think largely, for most of its history.
And a flour mill in the 1700s.
Yeah, and now it's been restored beautifully in this way. And I didn't realise until I came here that it's actually what you would call a clachan, which is a dwelling that would have crossed over a road. So these would have been one cluster of buildings.
And would there have been a kind of a wooden walkway across, or?
Well, there would have been a kind of a little causeway there. That would have been a cassie, as they call it. Which might have been in use. So I didn't realise that. So but this is the deep heart of County Down. I mean, certainly in this area, which is known as Lakeal, which is an ancient barony and was the territory of the McGuinnesses in the old days, and is almost an island. In fact, I think there's about a few feet of soggy ground, and that if it were flooded at any stage, we'd actually be an island.
Wow.
And it's the whole side basically that's just on this side of Strangford Lough.
Yeah, because the sea is about 3 miles in that direction.
And of course it's also St. Patrick's territory, because St. Patrick is buried in Downpatrick, which is our great claim to fame.
So as a young Damian, were you sort of running all over this territory, or were you a townie, or?
No, I was everywhere around here really, on walking and on bicycle. And I think actually, as it was said at one stage in Downpatrick, and I think this is true for most of Ireland, the invention of the bicycle was the great erotic revelation for most of the population, because up until then really your hinterland would have been governed by how far you could travel on foot, whereas the bicycle meant that you could actually perhaps meet people from whole other places instead of the danger of interbreeding. It wasn't that people were all marrying their cousins, but it would probably have got to that stage very quickly.
I thought you meant the Flann O'Brien man and bicycle, transmuting atoms and things.
Yeah, but I think that the centrality of the bicycle in Flann O'Brien, I think, is as a result of how central the bicycle was to being able to free people at a time when, other than that, you would have had to be either on foot or on horseback, and that wouldn't have been a possibility for most people.
So you were biking all over the place?
I was biking, yes, but not with erotic intent, but more with, I think, just to get out into the country, out into the fields, and to get to that moment that you find round here now, and I'm sure you've experienced it, which is suddenly, just stops and it's utter silence, except for the grasshoppers or the birds or the odd beast. And I think that moment then that you can actually hear the sunlight, if you like, and you can hear it on the ground. Those are priceless moments, and I think any child would be delighted to be brought up in an area like that.
But you weren't thinking poems at that stage. I mean, at what point did you become aware of poetry as either something that you'd read, but maybe something you might write?
Well, I mean, poems. The first poem I can remember hearing at all was The Old Woman of the Roads.
Oh yeah.
Which was Padre Colin.
Yeah.
And that hugely evocative poem, of course, the what is it, the blue and green and speckled store of the crockery in the little house that this old woman who has no home is yearning for as she travels the roads. And that was hugely evocative, as it would be for anybody that reads that poem. I mean, I think it's one of the great Irish poems, really.
And that was in school?
No, that was at home.
That was at home?
That was my mother who's still with us, thankfully. Read that to me when I was very young.
Okay.
And I got it, just as I think she got it, that particular yearning for your own place.
Yeah.
And I think the other little connection in that was that when I was very young, going out round these roads with my father, this was an area where we had travellers of the old type in the caravans, and also in
making
the
tin and
in the ditches, and sleeping in the which I mean, this is a thing that recurs actually in you know what I write, is this image of these people at the side of the road, in little roads like you'll find out in the country, with a tarpaulin strung between the hedge and the road, the you know, the roadside, the laneway, and they're in the ditch with a little fire. And I remember as a small boy being brought along one of the roads here with and you know, coming across these old dames in the
shawlies.
Sitting there with a few kids running around. And my father saluting them as we went past. And my father always said, you know, that there wasn't that there wasn't a great, you know, distance between people who were so-called settled and people who were unsettled. In that way, people who were travellers. But that was the old population, if you like, of that. I mean, I'm talking as if I was brought up in 1850.
Indeed.
But actually, this was the 1960s. So these were people who came around and were very familiar figures. And they weren't local, but they were populations that they would return periodically, maybe once a year, once every couple of years. So they were known to local people. So the Old Woman of the Roads poem then took on a very vivid presence for me. I mean, I think in that context, as it would for anyone who'd come into contact with that, that kind of representative of of a much older and different culture, which is what travellers are, thankfully.
So did school try and obliterate that interest in poetry, or because we talked to Iggy McGovern a few episodes ago, and he was sort of saying that, like, you know, the arts, writing was not considered in his sort of schooling, so it was afterwards he found his way towards it. Like, where was your first intersection with it as a kind of a practiced art now, I suppose?
Well, I think it was, I mean, really, you know, those first intimations were in the home. Now, I mean, you know, it wasn't a bookish home. But there was The Old Woman of the Roads as a narrative piece. Also things then that I would come across myself as a young boy, such as, you know, The Host of the Air by Yeats, and the Ballad of Father Gilligan, which is other Yeats. I mean, these were all country type poems and old type poems. So I don't know. I mean, I was entranced by those, I have to say.
But were you beginning to write?
Not really, no. But I mean, there was a kind of there was a consonance between what I was interested in hearing, the stories I wanted to hear, and the environment that I found myself in. Another one, oddly, was Flannan Isle by W.W. Gibson, which was a ballad about a haunted or a mysterious abandoned lighthouse off the coast of Scotland. And this is a tremendously evocative ballad, you know, because they were just, when they broke in when they arrived to the lighthouse, they found it abandoned. They were expecting to find 3 lighthouse keepers, but in fact, there's just a half-eaten meal on the table, the chair knocked over.
And nobody.
Nobody at all there. And so, you know, Gibson's a master of this kind of, kind of Gothic narrative. Well, that was hugely, because we have our lighthouse in Lecale, which is just a few miles away as well. So, and the rocks and the birds and the seals, and these were these were so all those stories were very close
Yeah.
as kind of mythic presences.
Yeah.
I think even for somebody like me running around
Yeah.
the countryside, it was
Yeah.
very easy
Yeah.
to imagine that these were actual
Yeah.
things. You know?
So you were recognizing the subject matter, I suppose, in ways from where your own surroundings.
Yeah.
And what is making me wonder, because I studied English literature, but never had a sense that, you know, writers were people like me, because they were all long dead and mostly male. So there was a point when I said, no, I'm going to start writing, and what I want to write about is as important, because I want to write about it. So I'm just curious, from your kind of trajectory, what was the point that you started to mark your own territory on your own page?
Well, there were things. I think I started to write that type of, or you know, poem or stories first.
Yeah,
actually,
stories
you know,
first.
Stories, yeah.
Yeah.
But it was all trying to everything that I was doing. Maybe when I was in primary school.
Yeah.
You know, we would be encouraged to write stories. There would be, you know, that would be part of the exercises.
Yeah.
Was that you would write stories and make it up, and you'd copy things that you'd seen in the movies or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
and you'd just write the story out and pretend it was yours. I think I've been doing that ever since. But you know, you try to find that moment, try to reproduce that moment of the uncanny,
Yeah.
if you like,
Yeah.
which I think is peculiar to poetry.
Yeah.
Where there's a moment in a line, you know, a line or a thought, which is just so explosive emotionally
Yeah.
that you never forget it.
Yeah.
And I think I was even at that stage, I mean, I think I was trying to reproduce those moments of the odd or the peculiar
Yeah.
or the, you know, the uncanny, which also has a you know, kind of a transcendental feel to it, you know, or a transformative feel, something that changes you. And I think I was searching for that.
Yeah.
And I still am, and I think all the time, I'm looking for that all the time.
Yeah, and
Looking
that
for
is
something.
what keeps
That's what keeps you going.
you going,
really.
that
And
surge.
then you would look at other types of, you know, I mean, I think once you're open to that kind of work, then you are open to it.
Yeah.
You meet it, you find it in other places, you know. And in primary school, certainly, it was, you know, you weren't encouraged, oh, you must sit down and write poems or anything like that, but you were, I mean, that kind of expression wasn't discouraged.
Yeah.
But did I think that I would ever be a writer like that? No. Did I ever read anything that had anywhere I knew in it?
Yeah.
Novels or not? No. I
No.
remember we did Kidnapped, and we did all the great Scottish novels and novels from the rest of Ireland, and you were looking for something that would, but I never.
Yeah. And when you went to Queen's then, because you studied philosophy in Queen's,
Oh,
you're a doctor of philosophy in Queen's, and 2 decades maybe after the group, the famous group, the Heaney and Longley and Joan Newman and people like that. So at that point, were you sort of conscious of, well, there's a tradition here that I am going to be part of and join, or?
No, not really. You know, I mean, I started writing. The first thing I had published was in the Irish Press, and it was you know, David Marcus's page in the Irish Press, which people will be familiar with.
New Irish writing, yeah.
You know, a daily newspaper, tremendous exposure. There was a Wednesday page at the time that I became familiar with it. There was the Saturday page, which was the main page.
Yeah.
But there was a Wednesday page as well, which had a little slot for young Irish writing, and I got a poem in that.
How old were you?
Maybe 15.
Wow, okay.
And it was, I mean, I was astonished. I was also very embarrassed, I have to say, at school, because I didn't actually think that I didn't connect something being published.
And the
with
Irish
people.
Press was read up here, so she ignorantly.
Yes, it was. It was very, you know, it was one of the popular papers among nationalist communities, if you want to call it that, you know. Certainly more than other newspapers would have been.
Mm-hmm. So you were outed, basically.
I was outed, yeah, and I fought that for quite a while. But then I was also sending poems then to the senior page on the Saturday, and on one occasion then David Marcus published a poem of mine, and I think the first one that appeared, probably 78 or something like that. I would have been maybe 16,
Well,
17,
yeah.
something like that. But I was on the page with Edna O'Brien. Edna O'Brien had a short story.
Oh, crikey.
And I was a poet on the page. Well, I was astonished. I mean, I knew Edna O'Brien's novels at that point because I'd come across them the way you do, even though they were, even then in the late 70s, for young boys, they were regarded as being quite racy. But to be on that with Edna O'Brien.
Affirmation.
Well, I thought this is incredible. And that was one of the things, one of the many things that David Marcus did.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the publication, but it was actually giving a validation to new emerging writers that their voice was valid.
Yeah.
I thought that was a marvellous thing, and even at that stage I was overcome by it.
Yeah.
But, and then going to Queen's, so I went to Queen's as a writer, and I was publishing pieces in the Irish press at that stage.
Yeah.
Fairly frequently.
Yeah.
Though by then they were embarrassingly cribs of Seamus Heaney, I have to say. I mean, some embarrassingly bad cribs.
But it must have been such a huge, huge shadow that he was exerting over everybody who was writing at the time.
Well, to go back to that original question that you asked in that context, when I got to Queen's though, Nessa, I mean, I think those were different times, you know. I mean, 1980, the group as such, we knew vaguely about as undergrads.
Yeah.
But even most of the people who were attending the group at that time would have been older writers in the 60s.
Yeah.
But like to somebody who was 18 in 1980,
no relevance.
The 1960s was like, it was like the Crimean War.
Yeah.
It was a long time ago. What there was in Belfast at that time was Michael Longley at the Arts Council, Paul Muldoon at the BBC, Kieran Carson was at the Arts Council, John Hewitt had been writer-in-residence at Queen's, Maeve McGuckian was teaching, Frank Ormsby was teaching as well and editing The Honest Ulsterman. So there was a gathering of well-known, successful poets in Belfast at the time that I came to Queen's, and there would be readings maybe once a month, invited readers into the university, and they would all have gathered for that, and maybe once or twice a year there would have been student readings. So you were able to read your work to what even at that stage were a gathering of maybe half a dozen of the best poets writing anywhere. Derek Mahan wasn't there, Seamus Heaney wasn't there, but nonetheless there was still a very vibrant. But the idea of the university as an incubator for writers wasn't really as much, if at all, a feature of what you were meant to do at a university as it became.
Because they weren't teaching creative writing.
No, they weren't at all. No.
In those years at all.
No, I had written when I was at school to James Simmons, who was also there. I mean, I should have mentioned James Simmons. He was a very body, racy, and therefore extremely interesting and attractive figure.
Absolutely.
To young emerging writers.
Yeah.
He was at the University of Coleraine, and I had written to him and sent him some poems, and he'd written
because he was involved with the Honest Ulsterman, wasn't he?
Oh, he was, yeah. He had founded the Honest Ulsterman, and I mean, at this stage, I think the editorship had moved on. Yeah. But he was very, he was gracious. Yeah. And to a younger writer, and John Hewitt was at Queen's, and I wrote to him as well, and sent him poems. Oh, desperately embarrassing things, and he wrote back. And so there was a sense that you were able to make contact with a world which did involve print and books, and that what you might be saying or writing might have a validity in that context. You know? Having said that, I got to know John Hewitt quite well the last few years of his life, which was really a pivotal moment for me, really. Even though he was much older. I mean, he was 70, 76 when
But pivotal in terms of content of what you wanted to write about, or? Yeah.
Well, Hewitt's one of his great ideas, I think, important ideas, was the idea of, what he called a region. Yeah. And though even he knew, he had thought that the idea of a region might be a way of prizing open some of the truculence of Northern Unionist attitudes to Ireland and to other things as a whole. But then he began to realise maybe there wasn't just one region here, maybe there were two, there might even have been more. Yeah. But I think what he was also doing was writing about people
Yeah.
and places
Yeah.
that were, you know, that he knew and that were local.
Yeah.
And I liked that.
Yeah.
I thought that was powerful, not just because they were local,
Yeah.
but because there was actually a deep imaginative, you know, they constituted a deep imaginative resource which had an energy of their own
Yeah.
that you could, you know, hopefully tap.
Yeah, because there's a quote now that I extracted in my research, an interview that you did with the Culture Northern Ireland blog, and you say, Downpatrick is what I want to write about. I have absolutely no interest in anything else except where it touches on that. A lot does touch on that. So that your local is the place that you were born, the place you grew up, but that is a prism for a much larger universal kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I think that's true of anywhere.
Yeah.
If it's approached properly.
Yeah.
If it's approached with empathy and with a sense of not being dictated to by it, which I think is the other thing.
Yeah.
So I was able, Queen's wasn't, and the formal education thing wasn't a particularly productive time for my own creativity.
Yeah.
And I mean, I arrived at Queen's, as I said, as a writer. I left it not
Unsure.
as a writer.
Yeah.
And I didn't publish. I mean, I was 38, 39
Yeah,
before
when your first book was...
my first
yeah.
book. So it was a long period of disquiet, I think
Yeah.
you would describe it as,
Yeah.
after that. And when I did come to write the poems that I now am comfortable writing,
Yeah.
they were about everywhere around here.
Yeah.
And they came very quickly.
Yeah.
And I was able in my first book, Downpatrick Races, to include poems that I'd had published when I was 17.
Right.
And the voice
Yeah.
between those two, between being 17 and 37, if you like,
Yeah.
was more or less the same. And in between was dissonance and confusion and all sorts of things. So the Hewitt confidence in that, being able to write about your own place and have the confidence that there would be things there that would be intelligible to others.
Yeah.
But also the thought that even if they weren't intelligible to others, it didn't matter.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to say those things
Yeah.
that I had to say
Yeah.
about the place that I was
Yeah.
part of, and it was part of me.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter really. And I think that liberation
Yeah.
of not being tied to an audience,
Yeah.
funnily enough,
Yeah.
or the expectations of others, I think was a great freedom
Yeah.
when it came to write.
And you sustained that over what, 7 volumes?
Yeah.
Have you been quite consciously thematic in terms of the different books, or has it, how have you kind of ordered that, I suppose?
What'll happen is there have been formal changes
Yeah.
over the period. The Downpatrick Races book, we also have a tremendous racing culture, horse racing culture around here locally, and which also involves bookies and all those tremendous people that we still have, and jockeys and horse breeding and training. So that was part of the kind of ambiguity of the Downpatrick Races thing, but also that those are more or less traditional lyric poems. I would have thought,
Yeah.
there are some more ambitious things within it, but really that's what it is. Then after that, I looked at our local newspaper, which is the Down Recorder, which has been in continuous publication since 1836.
Gosh, that must be one of the longest lasting in the country.
It's very...
In the British Isles, maybe?
Well, it would be. I mean, there's a great history of local newspaper publishing in Ireland, and it go back a century and a half, maybe more, but what you get then is, because it's a small town and it hasn't really changed much over that period, but there were stories then which involved people whose stories ordinarily then wouldn't make it into the history books. So you get the people who drowned in impossible situations, people who grew extraordinarily large apples and turnips, and then those stories appear in the local pages. Other people who, like for instance, someone who was a champion pedestrian, which I always thought was a tremendous, feat.
Accomplishment, absolutely.
Yeah. So was able to walk, say, 1,000 miles in 2 days.
Wow.
But only by going backwards and forwards over a mile, repeatedly over that period of
time.
That
sounds familiar for the people who have to do 10,000 steps a day.
Yes, well, this is the remarkable thing. And then, unlike the people who have to do 10,000 steps a day, this person was carried shoulder high through the streets in salute to their achievement. Those things in those papers then began to mark out ordinary lives, lives that wouldn't otherwise be regarded as of note in the history sense. But I think in another way are very much the staple of poems. It's the annals of the poor, I feel like, without being too po-faced about it. And I think that's something that has always interested me as well. I think particularly in a town here where you had an asylum, a jail and a workhouse. And because of the character of it as a county town, those are three ominous institutions in any location. And I think that again you have a kind of as a kind of all the population becomes kind of a refugee status, if you like. That and the fragility of what might separate you from destitution, I think was always very much to the fore. So those are the tales I think that would have interested me.
But contemporary history or near recent contemporary history is also there, and certainly reading through English Street, that sort of shadow of the Troubles is never very far, and you're talking about somebody from school and something happens to them later, and you have a memory of a particular time when we're all innocent of what's going to happen later and that sort of thing.
Well, this brings us back. I mean, when I came to Queen's University as a student from school from Downpatrick, a year ahead of me in my school was Damian Gorman, who's a poet, playwright, filmmaker. A year behind me was John Hughes, who published several volumes with Gallery Press, the devil himself. And I mean, I think that what you're looking at there is there was a kind of a culture, if you like, or a kind of a heritage already forming as to how we would. Why that's the case, I don't know. But certainly there was a narrative going on about how you might confront the world that we were growing into, which was very dark, very violent, very risky. And a very good friend of mine and John Hughes, Eamon Quinn, was murdered in 1982. And that was only 20. That took away a life. And that figure of Eamon has increasingly, as the years have gone by, has become a kind of a companion. And I've begun to write more about him and those circumstances and how things happen in that way. And certainly that had a big impact.
So, like in a way, in the same way as the sort of the local becomes the universal, the individual victim becomes the universal victim. And I think that has to be that the voice of the voice of the voiceless, if you like, in that wholly inadequate, silly expression. But really, it's over 30 years now of a life that wasn't lived. And I find that on occasion, as people will, in any circumstance where there's been a life cut short, people will find it appalling. And I still find that. And I hope in some way there's that conversation that's going on still, certainly in my mind, between myself and Eamon Quinn, is some kind of excuse as well as to what I've done. So was he the guy who called you Bones?
Yeah.
Why? Why were you
That was
Bones?
my nickname.
Did you look like DeForest Kelly in Star Trek?
No,
or?
I was very skinny. And,
were you?
Yes, and I know that's hard to imagine now, but I was a very skinny young man.
Bones gets mentioned in the poem.
Yes, when I was at school, and that was my nickname. So he called that out on a couple of occasions, And there are still people around who would still call me Bones when they meet me. from school, you know, but that's not uncommon, I think.
What does the general Downpatrick population think of this body of work about them?
Oh, I've no idea. I do know that the Arkle Bar and Lounge, which is one of our more, one of our older hostelries.
And was the horse didn't have a direct... I know you gave out to me once because I didn't know that there was a GAA team in Down, and I do know now that there is. But I didn't know, did Arkle have a connection with County Down?
No, apart from the fact that Arkle was backed by practically everybody in Ireland.
Fair
and
enough.
I think that there are quite a few automobiles, fridges, cookers, television sets and houses may very well have been bought on the back of Arkle. So let's not knock Arkle.
Absolutely.
And the fact that there's a bar in the town still named after him, I think is a great tribute to the Matey, that Matey individual.
So do they have reading groups of your work in there, do you think? Or is there any kind of...
I would think that's highly unlikely. But there is, as far as I know, there's a copy of a poem on the wall.
Oh, very good.
Yeah, so I think that's quite, I mean, that'll do me as an afterlife, I think. Come on, I mean, it's poetry, and this is a working town, and people get on with their lives, and the poet business is done by the poet people, and that's us and those few who pay attention to that, you know, and I think they coexist quite nicely in that way.
Could you talk to me a little just about the shape of the poems in English Street in particular, but you also, I think, did it in Market Street a bit. That you don't break down into stanzas at all. There's just one long line, long, maybe 60, 70 lines in a poem, maybe, or whatever. So quite uniform. And I did read, again, I think in that same interview that you were saying you wanted to get away from the little boxes of text. So that's been a deliberate part of your process as well.
Yeah, well, I think they're not quite 60. Market Street are 20 lines, and the poems in English Street are 20, 25 and 30. Oh,
okay.
So, and those, now that's the lines, they're not broken, they're just one unbroken block of verse.
But it's not prose poetry.
No.
No.
No. Well, I would hope it isn't.
Yeah,
you know?
no, it's not.
You know, you can only hope.
Yeah.
But I think that there is it's governed by cadence, it's governed by rhythm. It's also governed by syntax.
Yeah.
So I think I try to include in a line of poetry, which may extend over several physical lines on the page, the kind of complexity that you might find in a thought process, so that there will be interruptions in a train of thought, and there will be digressions, and there will be hopefully some conclusions.
Yeah.
But the idea is really to get away from that tyranny of the lyric, which is that this is going to make you feel good. Yeah. Which is what the lyric tells you. Yeah. In lots of ways. Or feel something anyway. Well, usually it's feel good. Yeah. I mean, I think, and even when the elegy will try to make you feel something else. Yeah. And I think that there is a sense of poetry that poetry is about bringing good news. Yeah. And that isn't really my forte. Are you working things out through the poem? Yeah. You're arriving at gathering certain impressions around a single theme or thought. Yeah. And then questioning that within it. Yeah. And you do question the way we do. Yeah. Rather than offering conclusions or any, definitive answers to anything. Yeah. You're basically just trying to, to discourse around that. And I like the idea of exchange and commerce of ideas within a single piece of poetry. Yeah. And the idea is that it'll also be a read. Yeah. I like the idea of a book as a good read. Yeah, absolutely. So that you do have that sense that you're actually going to be able to engage yourself over a period of time with what you're involving in, whether that's a poem individually or a whole book. Yeah. Well, it might be a good time to maybe hear a couple. Okay. Okay. Right. I'll probably try that poem that
With
you...
Damian Quinn?
Yeah. Now, bear with me on this one because... right, okay. One of the other features of this book, English Street, is that I associate a particular poem with a townland, you know, a small region of the area that I live in, and this is called the Taconic Cogito,
Yes.
which is just referencing that well-known phrase of Descartes, cogito ergo sum. It doesn't do to believe everything you're told, or to keep believing what you once knew was true, unless, as Descartes said, it is so distinct and clear, the recollection, that is, of having been so sure. You don't need to check. It's all in front of you. Take Eamon Quinn, my mate, no longer here. A lifetime ago, when Celtic played Dundalk, with the scarf I'd bought him, longer than himself, curled round inside the furry hood of his parka, caught up as thousands surged on the terraces, pulled out from me, waving, lost, but still in view. And then his voice, high-pitched in the push and heave, calling my nickname, Bones, Bones, in that odd timbre. I misunderstood. He was scared. He was quickly gone. They say that loss is a thing itself, thick like stone, or light as a call the body makes without reply. It was only when the last of him disappeared, I punched through to where he was swallowed whole, reached waist high where he'd stumbled and sat down, and pulled him back up by a handful of fur, hood torn. Years after, when it was thought that he'd been stabbed, so radical were his exit wounds, so intimate the damage in his own hallway where they had found and shot him. The pattern of absence was already known, but not its weight, endurance, depth, or how much of it there was.
Super.
Just another one that's in that time period a little bit earlier is we had a chip shop in Downpatrick, as you might have in every town everywhere, called the Portofino, which I didn't know until much later was was an actual place elsewhere. So I made, for a while, I made the chipped potatoes for the Portofino out the back in a shed in appalling hygienic conditions or unhygienic conditions. So this is a small boy's story. The Portofino conclave. I was in an outhouse at the back of the Portofino, making chips for the deep fryer, skinning potatoes in a washing machine on fast spin. Then the bald heads clamped through a grill to the long cartridges of light. But everywhere else, it was the age of Victoria. A mouldered cottage off Irish Street someone was living in when the Boer War broke out. The raw levies, even now, in the cafe itself, in brown leather jackets, moustaches, tattoos, out of work teenagers, but hairy and grown up, fingers cradling cigarettes with the Bernie bit inside, not moving their outstretched legs when I entered, skinny and ashamed, dragging a bucket behind me. This is the 70s. Some of these were cavalry from the horse barracks, empty for a century, even then. Some were Norsemen, longboats, decanted at Strangford, withdrawn and monkish or high on action. And some were provisionals, though which was uncertain, which accounted for the giddiness, the masculine silences, those transformations, as I made away, small and afraid, then and now, still estranged, bringing the ordinary in.
Great, great. One more, just for the joy of hearing you read them.
Okay, well, I'll read this. This is a poem that has English Street in it. Our school didn't have a swimming pool, but the other school in Downpatrick did. I was reared as a Catholic and a nationalist in Downpatrick, and the other school was a state school to which mostly those who weren't Catholic, those who were Protestant, would have attended. They had a different coloured uniform. Theirs was green, ours was red. But we shared, they did have a swimming pool, and we shared use of their swimming pool, which was wonderful. The other thing was that they also had things called girls, which our school didn't have, which I think was a very serious oversight on the part of my education. So, swimming up English Street. All I did was go for a swim up English Street, swallowing miles of water that only looked as blue as the Mediterranean. But that was the cerulean tiles. Only looked to have lanes shimmering on the surface, runways walled by stone to keep order. But in fact, those were markings on the inside, on that ceiling the pool floor was, to which I aspired as a collector of weights and rings, medals, lungfuls of worn air. A culvert bomb a mile off on the Ballydugan Road would send the chlorine lapping the pool walls. Something like the wine in the Europa Hotel, thrown out when a report shattered the linings of Balthazar and Nebuchadnezzar, rainbow drizzle of powdered glass tincturing the vintages. Another element, like a holy well, full of miracles. Once a year, pool water shared with the Protestant school. Whole lovely selves, articulate, refracted, unbroken by surfaces, as if we had come there to be healed and were undamaged. Each armful or embrace pulling the known world to ourselves. There were vials of Strull water for sale in the town hall, but nothing, trust me, as electric as their bodies bathed in. New wine in new wineskins, nose-fluting mouth breathers, exotics from the other nations, Nubians, Shebans, sea nymphs, water sprites, naiads, those necessary others, from those isles to which, though barely afloat, I've not ceased to stretch my arms. Those still possible intervals, laps, widths, strokes, lengths.
Wonderful. And you mentioned Strull there, and Paul Maddern was telling us the other night that there were two holy wells in Stroul, segregated. There was a men's holy wells and a female's holy well.
Yeah.
Is this correct?
Yeah, but hold on a minute. They were naked people. There were two wells where men could bathe naked and women could bathe naked.
For
and
the health.
The distance between the two, Nessa, was the distance between you and me, sitting here now. Now,
Shocking.
if you don't regard that as being quite radical,
Progressive.
I don't know.
I think that's
that was
very progressive.
I mean, that was the case in Stroul, and they were ancient wells long before the medieval little corbelled huts were built.
Yeah.
But again, Stroul wells were the first poems that I had published in the Irish press were about Stroul wells.
There you go. There you go. About 18 years ago, you and I worked on a project called art.ie, which was a website promoting arts events on the island of Ireland. And you were working for the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, and I was working for the Arts Council on Cordia Eileen. I didn't have the stamina to keep up and left a couple of years later. You're still working with the Arts Council of Northern Ireland. How do you sustain your own practice in such a busy, stressful world? You know, how do you make that headspace for your own writing?
Well, when that started, Nessa, I was in PR, as you were, and that's when I first joined the Arts Council of Northern Ireland, and that was 95 actually when I started there, and that was a different world again then. Yeah. But I was very fortunate at that time that we were able to host, for instance, Seamus Heaney just after he came back from, after he'd won the Nobel Prize. Yeah. Those were great things. I met R.S. Thomas on his one and only visit to Ireland at that stage. Yeah. But what sustained it was that after 5 or 6 years as in PR, I was appointed the literature officer. Yeah. And that has been the case since. And how do and it coincided really with the period when I started to publish in book form. So it hasn't really, I mean, I can't say that it's impeded my own creativity in that way at all. I'm always been very careful to separate the two activities.
But are you able to write on the go, myself, or do you have
to? Yeah, I do that now.
So like the back of an envelope?
Yeah, I've always done that. I mean, you just have to. I mean, it's one of the things that you have to do as a human alive in the 21st century, is that you just write when you have the chance and when you have the time. And that's a skill, I think, that needs to be cultivated as well. Yeah. And that's something I would pass on to others. Yeah. But the other great asset is I get to meet young writers. And I mean, I was just thinking over the weekend, this now is 2018. Well, somewhere in Ireland right now, somebody is doing their, or has just done their final exams, or is in some other area of working life, who is the first great writer of the 21st century, somewhere. Yeah. And maybe in a few years, that person I'll get to meet that person at an early stage of their, you couldn't get better than that. Yeah. You learn from young people and young writers. Yeah.
It's a very generous attitude. Very generous attitude, I have to say. What's coming next, do you think? Another book you've just published? Is there more to write about Dan Patrick? Is there?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, this is just, I think, is finished. It's hard to let go of a book. I mean, there are 70 poems in this book, and there was quite a construction around them. So I'm still not sure that it's gone from me yet, But what will happen is I'll settle down in a few months and I'll write. I'll just keep writing. I have a few essays that that I want to do on various influences that I've had. One of them actually is completely oddly in all this here, is Edith Sitwell, which is an odd. Yeah. But that other strain, which is that that you find, which is that the poet, as well as being one of the people, can also be the strange, exotic, avian character, strange birds spotted around the house, as Hewitt would say. And I think that's something as well that certainly has appealed to me and Edith Sitwell would be one of those. You know, he was also very fond of the long lines, and you know, and convoluted syntax. So there's lots of things to do as long as I'm spared.
Well, we are delighted that you spared the time to come here, and in such gorgeous surroundings as the River Mill. But great to get a chance to talk to you, finally, about your own work, and hear some of your poems. So thank you so much for coming along.
Thank you, Ines. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you very much for watching. We'll be back again shortly. No idea what we're going to be talking to you about, but we will be back. Thanks a lot.
Yes, I know that I'm just a dreamer. Yes, I know that I'm just a dreamer. I dream 'cause it's the closest I'll ever get to you.